Answer the question instead of going back.
I'll provide the answer. No. I'm providing an answer in order to provide context. Republicans have repeatedly...
To get done, you are going to need at least some Republicans to come over. Why not start with a one-year extension or potentially even a two-year extension?
Well, Leader Schumer offered a one-year extension in the context of trying to end the Trump Republican shutdown.
Yeah, that's different. What I'm talking about what you have now. Let's not go back to what's done in the past and what has not been extended. If you want to get something that has actually done, you need to do something that will have bipartisan.
You can ask me the question. You can ask me the question. I'll provide the answer.
Answer the question instead of going back.
I'll provide the answer. No. I'm providing an answer in order to provide context. Republicans have repeatedly refused to take yes for an answer. It was a very reasonable multi-year extension that was offered. It was a one-year straight extension plus a multi-year process through a bipartisan commission to more permanently resolve the Affordable Care Act issue. So having that context is absolutely important, regardless of what you may think.
It's important context to make me realize that I don't think you want to get a deal done. I think this is something where you'd like to see the rates go higher and allow the Republicans to hang themselves with that. Is that the answer?
That's absolutely a ridiculous assertion. And really, shame on you.
3 years is not going to get passed, so what do you do?
Shame on you for saying that. Because we're fighting. It's not a partisan issue for us. In fact, the states that are most impacted as it relates to an Affordable Care Act tax credit expiration are all Republican states. We're talking about West Virginia, Wyoming, Alaska, Mississippi, right? Tennessee. Over and over and over again, we can go through the list. That's why you probably have
some Republicans who would sign on if you guys could come up with something that actually looks like a bipartisan deal.
Listen, this is not a partisan fight for us. It's a patriotic fight. We're fighting for every constituent, even if Republicans aren't necessarily fighting for their own constituent. We want to find a bipartisan path forward. And that is what we've repeatedly indicated we want to do. Like, we want to sit down and have a reasonable discussion, find common ground to address this issue. Now, Republicans said in the House they were willing to deal with the Affordable Care Act tax credit issue after the government funding agreement was reached. Well, now the government shutdown is over, and there's still been no conversations with House Republican leaders.
Mike Johnson never said that. The leader never said that. You do have Republicans, though, who would agree with you on something if it was actually bipartisan in nature. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Actually, Mike Johnson actually did say that there was always a plan to specifically deal with the expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. In fact, he said that repeatedly. So I'm not sure what you're referencing. I think
their plan is something that looks more like an HCA, which I'm guessing you would say is dead on arrival, too. If you wanted to set up these health care plans that are funded instead of going through the ACA, I'm assuming you would say that's dead on arrival, too, because there have been Republicans who've put that forward. Am I wrong in thinking you would not go along with that?
What I'm saying is that what's in front of us is the immediate expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. Republicans have had all year to deal with this issue, and they've refused to do it. So they're the ones who are not interested in finding a resolution to a health care crisis that they've created, including passing a bill that enacted the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. And because of their policies, hospitals, nursing homes, and community-based health centers are closing throughout America, including in rural parts of the country.
Which why it would be nice to see a one-year extension so that none of these things happen immediately and give you all time to actually try and work on bipartisan situations, rather than a 3-year extension that basically kicks it down until the next administration is here.
From the very start of the exchange, the weakness in Hakeem Jeffries' position becomes obvious. He is confronted with a clear, practical question, and instead of answering it, he immediately tries to bury it under layers of rehearsed rhetoric meant to distract from what he cannot defend. The moment he is asked why Democrats refuse a short-term extension that could pass, he abandons the present entirely and drags the discussion into unrelated history. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate attempt to avoid admitting the real reason. Democrats don't want a temporary fix because it forces them into real negotiation without the ability to stretch the crisis into a political weapon. A one-year extension would stabilize the situation, prevent immediate damage, and require both parties to return to the table quickly. That is exactly why Jeffries avoids it. Democrats rely on prolonged deadlines to build political pressure, not on fast, practical solutions. Admitting this would expose the strategy behind their refusal, so Jeffries clings to distracting narratives. Every time he is pushed back toward the actual question, the panic shows. He interrupts, he deflects, he tries to talk past the point. His tone rises not because he has a solid argument, but because the ground under his position is hollow. He insists Democrats want bipartisanship, yet rejects the only approach that has a realistic chance of securing bipartisan support. The contradiction is glaring. Democrats don't want cooperation, they want compliance. They label something bipartisan only when Republicans agree entirely with Democratic terms. Anything else is framed as obstruction, even when it's the most achievable path. Jeffries' refusal to consider the short-term fix isn't ideological, it's tactical. The party needs the pressure of an unresolved crisis to maintain narrative control. Instead of addressing this, Jeffries leans on emotional offense, the standard move Democrats deploy when cornered. He tries to inflate his tone as though outrage can disguise the absence of a logical explanation. He treats basic scrutiny as unreasonable. This tactic may work in friendly media environments where Democratic leaders are rarely challenged. But when someone refuses to accept rehearsed talking points, their arguments collapse quickly. Jeffries expected to deliver a monologue, not to defend a position. When forced into the latter, he ran out of substance. His pivot to selective history exposes another Democratic pattern. When the present is indefensible, pretend the past justifies everything. Jeffries recounts old disputes because acknowledging the current reality would show that Democrats had every opportunity to address this issue months ago and chose not to. They ignored the timeline until the expiration became politically valuable. Only then did they claim urgency, blaming Republicans for a crisis Democrats themselves allowed to approach unhindered. This is not governance. It is calculated neglect for strategic gain. Whenever Jeffries gets close to being pinned down, he dodges into abstract language about fighting for constituents or defending vulnerable states. But these broad claims crumble against the specifics. If Democrats were truly focused on stability, they would accept the one-year extension that prevents immediate damage. If Democrats were committed to fairness, they would negotiate in good faith instead of demanding a multi-year extension they know cannot pass. If Democrats were serious about governing, they would address the problem when it appears, not when it becomes politically useful. Jeffries' refusal to acknowledge Republican interest in finding a compromise is intentional. Admitting it would shatter the Democratic narrative that Republicans are wholly unwilling to negotiate. The truth is that acknowledging bipartisan potential would undermine the Democrats' political strategy, which hinges on portraying the opposition as the sole obstacle. Jeffries avoids any hint that collaboration is possible because the Democratic message depends on the appearance of gridlock, not the reality of it. He cannot explain why Democrats dismiss every alternative without discussion. He cannot explain why negotiations must be delayed rather than pursued immediately. He cannot explain why the party allowed the issue to sit idle. He cannot explain why a long-term extension, far less realistic, is preferable to a short one that could pass now. Every hole in the argument is covered by inflated rhetoric rather than facts. The strategy is clear. Democrats benefit from a drawn-out problem because a drawn-out problem creates fear, pressure, and leverage. If the issue is resolved quickly, they lose the narrative. They lose the ability to blame Republicans for inaction. They lose the opportunity to claim that only Democrats are fighting for the people. A temporary fix removes all of that. That is why Jeffries avoids it at all costs. His inability to provide a coherent justification is not a personal failing. It is the unavoidable consequence of defending a political plan built on optics rather than policy. When stripped of the rehearsed performance, Jeffries is left exposing the broader weakness of his party's leadership. Democrats speak confidently when repeating familiar lines, but when those lines are challenged, their positions fall apart. They rely on framing, emotion, and repetition, not logic. Jeffries' behavior throughout the exchange reflects a political movement more interested in managing perceptions than solving problems. Democrats construct crises, postpone solutions, and then exploit the environment they helped create. They reject realistic fixes because realistic fixes eliminate the emotional leverage they depend on. They treat negotiation as surrender and accountability as an inconvenience. They invoke bipartisanship only when they expect the other side to comply. As Jeffries twists away from the simplest question, the pattern becomes unmistakable. The Democrats' refusal is not about policy feasibility, it's about political utility. The longer the issue lingers, the more it can be shaped into a weapon. The faster it is resolved, the fewer opportunities they have to claim victimhood or moral superiority. Jeffries never states this outright, but every evasive maneuver reveals it. He can't justify the position because the position was never about governing. It was about maintaining leverage. His avoidance, frustration, and scripted deflection demonstrate a party terrified of losing its narrative control. And no matter how forcefully he tries to mask it, his inability to answer directly exposes exactly what lies beneath the surface of the Democratic stance: strategy above substance, politics above people, and narrative above truth.